you doing, guys? Today we are back on my 1955 Wheelhorse Senior. Ultimately, the goal is to have it back on its original rear tires. That means putting in the torque tube, the drive shaft, putting the banjo rear end back on, getting the gear case covers back on. It's going to be a lot of work. In theory, not hard work, just a lot of work. So the first thing we need to do before we do anything is to get the drive shaft and the torque tube back in place. I've shown this a couple times on the channel, but I just want to redocument it just in case if someone's new and they see this video years later and they may have picked up a Senior, trying to fix a Senior, or something to that effect. One of the things that I have to point out is this gear case. This is not an original gear case to a Wheelhorse Senior. This is a reproduction, if you want to call it. The original gear case is right here, and you can see mine was really bastardized. There's stick weld, there's brass, there's all sorts of stuff. Ultimately, at some point in its life, you can see there was a severe fracture of the case, which is really weird, but it happened. Luckily, I knew someone from Red Square, Brian, who was a machinist by trade, and he was kind enough to make me a new gear case out of a solid block of steel. That saved this project, and I can't thank him enough for his willingness to take on that project. The gear case is amazing. So with that being said, big shout out and thank you to him. With that, what we are in position to do right now, I'm putting the gear case on my workbench, sorry. We got to get the drive shaft in first. It slides into this roller bearing right here. The teeth engage the output shaft of the transmission. And then we have to bolt the torque tube in place. Now, one thing about the torque tube is there's a hood stand right here that needs to be installed with the torque tube. There are the top four bolts of the gear case mounting bolts hold the hood stand in place. So with that, there are four longer bolts, and then there's two shorter bolts. And the two shorter bolts go in the bottom. I am going to use a little bit of black, ultra black Permatex to help seal the gasket that I made. So we'll just make, actually I'll probably clean, I definitely will clean the case, make sure it's squeaky clean. I'll put a ring of black sealer on that. I'll put the drive shaft, I'll put the torque tube, get the hood stand, and then I'm going to snug those bolts down. I'm not going to torque them all the way in. I'll just snug them in. Next, we'll get the rear, make sure that's clean. We'll get that back in place, but I'll show you that once we get the torque tube in. I got the torque tube and the drive shaft in place. I have the hood stand. The bearing that the drive shaft goes into, I did pre-lube that with some assembly lube, engine assembly lube. I did tighten down these bolts. They're just snug. They're not torqued in yet. I want it's a little cold today, so I want that sealer to kind of firm up a little bit before I go ahead and torque that into place. Plus, I want there's no movement, but in theory, there might be a little bit of movement if I need to line up the banjo with the tube. One of the things I do need to be cognizant of is that is the the yoke from the rear goes in here, but this drive shaft is loose in there, so I'm going to have to kind of manipulate it, the rear end that is, to slide into that yoke. That way we can bolt it to the torque tube, and I can line up the four bolts that on both sides that hold it in place. So I'm going to figure out how I'm going to lift this into the air a little bit. I'm going to use my floor jack. I'm going to figure that out and then try to slide it into place. Okay, I think I got it fairly close. I got the rear end up a few more inches with those wood blocks. It's just barely, I got to fix that block because that's barely holding on. But it appears that I got it fairly lined up. I mean, I'm going to have to finagle it around a little bit to get it in place, but I think I got it fairly lined up where I can get that yoke into the drive shaft and start a couple of the bolts. That's the hope and the plan. And then with it just a little bit loose, then I'll try to get at least one or two of the bolts per side in place, and I can just get the tractor back into a normal position. I did move my jack stands forward. I lowered them to tip that frame back. So wish me luck. I'm probably going to have to fight this a little bit. Everything went together fairly easily. You saw that it slipped back together. I torqued these bolts to 30 foot-pounds, so they're all set and ready to go. I torqued these to 25 foot-pounds. Little bit of manipulation needed to get things going. I did get all 4 bolts in place on the side covers. I haven't tightened them down. I just put those in just so I could get everything to line up before I torqued these bolts into place. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull each bolt out one by one, clean everything really well, put a little Permatex on this side of the bolt head so that way it seals up, because this is filled with all gear lube. And I'll put a little bit of blue Loctite on the nuts so that way they're all they're all locked in and they're not going to come apart. So let me go ahead and get that together, reposition the jack stands, and we'll start putting these gear cases back together. Beautiful. Everything worked out real nice. All the bolts are in place for the rear end side plates. I did put a little bit of black sealer on the heads of each one of the bolts. I made sure when I torqued them into place or tightened up the back bolts, I didn't have them spin. I held them in place so that way they drew and squished all that sealer around. So hopefully they won't weep. As for the nuts, they're all in place. I put a little bit of blue Loctite and I torqued it to 30 foot-pounds. So all of that is done. Next up, we've got to clean the outside edge where the gear case goes into place. We also got to clean real nicely the gear case mating surface. Going to use a little black RTV and put that in place. This is a little bit cumbersome only because the gear cases are a little bit heavy. They're probably about 20 pounds a piece, and there's no locating dowels. So it's kind of like put the axle in, make sure everything's clean, put the axle in, and then goo it all up, and then put it in place, and then kind of line it up with 2 or 3 of the bolts. It's a little bit cumbersome, but I will show you how I do that. All the gear cases are back together. The drums are on. As I showed you, the only thing is my cotter pin broke, so I got to get 2 new cotter pins for the main nuts that hold the brake drums on, hold the brake drums in place. The thing that's kind of interesting is if you grab the end of this brake drum and you push in and out, this one is nice and solid. It spins real good. There's no movement. If you come over to this one and you grab this and you slide in and out, this drum moves in and out, or the axle moves in and out pretty good. There's no up and down or side to side play, but it does go in and out. It's how it was when I got the tractor, and you know, it was that way when I put it back together the first time. I tried to think about shimming it, but you know what? It's good enough. It's not, it's fine. So, but it is a little bit of a difference between the 2 gear cases, and I try to, you know, be 100% honest with how everything comes out. All right, with that, I am going to jack it up off the jack stands, and let's get the rear tires back on it. There she is, all back together. This actually went really smooth. I thought maybe it might fight me, but it didn't. As you can see, the hood stands in place, the torque tube's in place, drive shaft, gear cases were broken down, put back together, everything was torqued, everything was put together. We just got to get a set of cotter pins for the axle ends. I'll get that over the next couple days. But in general, cannot complain. That went together very nicely. Just pushing it from the center of the garage over to here, there is a bunch of gear noise coming out of the gear case. You can just hear the teeth banging each other as it's rolling. So there's no oil in there. So once the oil gets in there, that should shut that up. Same with the gear cases over here. You know, there's a little bit of gear noise, but that should all go away. Number 1, they're straight cut gears, and 2, there's no oil in there. So we'll fill that up with the oil, which I gotta order. We'll talk about that in a different video. I think up next is to take that steering box that I completely rebuilt, start to install that, put the links together, start to align the tires and things to that nature. Because ultimately, once it warms up here, we'll get the engine started. We'll have gear oil and everything in the transmission, in the rear end gear cases, and then we'll just we'll jack it up, let the tires up off the floor, and we'll just start it up, drop it in first gear, and just let it roll, you know, just let it run with the tires spinning. So that way we can get oil throughout the drive line without a massive load. All right. So a couple more things. Got to still fit the hood, blah, 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 blah. But in general, I think it's right there. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you would leave a comment below. And as always, until we meet again, until the next project, you have a great day.